As we move into the data analysis phase of our research project, I will be putting together several videos that show step-by-step approaches on how to conduct some of the data analysis, some tips on the techniques and what to look for on the computer screens. So these videos should be very valuable as a resource for you as you and your groups move through that data analysis effort. The class discussion that we have had is based on a set of PowerPoint slides entitled Step 1 Data Analysis, and the first part of that discussion focused on how we take data that we received either through a paper and pencil questionnaire or a survey on QuestionPro, how we get that data into an Excel spreadsheet format that's readily available into SPSS. So what you see on the screen in front of you is what your Excel spreadsheet should look like at that point once you've cleaned all of your data and gotten it into an Excel spreadsheet. As you remember from our class discussion, a couple of things to note. Notice here on the first row, each column corresponds to a question on our survey. So you see Q1, Q2, Q3, all the way across. Those relate to questions on your questionnaire. S number relates to the subject number. So you see then in the columns, this is the subject number 1 through however many people completed your survey. And then in column B, Q1, you see all of the responses and answers to the first question on your survey. Notice here for Q 5A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I. That's a set of questions that go together on your survey. All of those fit together. And again, you see in column F all the responses for Q5A, and in G all the responses for question 5B. So what you see once you get your Excel spreadsheet to this point is all of your data is here in the middle of this spreadsheet, corresponding to responses of subject 1, 2, 3. So each row is a subject, each column is a question, and this is what your survey should look like. It's really important as you transfer this data into SPSS that the first row is the titles of the questions that you're using on your survey, and SPSS will read that and input that as they pull the data into SPSS. So presuming that you get the Excel spreadsheet that looks like this, you'll need to follow along in our PowerPoint slides to make sure you can get to this point. What I'd like to do now is show you a little bit about what this should look like as you move into SPSS. As you launch SPSS, this is what the screen will look like. What I recommend is that you just click OK. This is a welcome screen giving you a couple of options about a tutorial or some other features of SPSS, but just say OK, and what you will do is then get a screen that will show you this is what the SPSS menu will look like. You can say open. What we're doing is we're going to be pulling in on this first step. And you'll only need to do this the very first time you pull your data in from Excel to SPSS, is you'll need to open up that Excel spreadsheet in SPSS. So you say open, and what we're really trying to open is a data file. So select open and data, and then it will ask you to select where the data file is housed so you can find that. My recommendation, as you recall, is always use a jump drive or a thumb drive. It's the easiest to find within SPSS. So I select my travel drive that I'm using. Now, one technique and one spot that a lot of students oftentimes get hung up on is they get this far and they say, well, I don't see my data file here. Well, remember, right now we're in SPSS. It's looking for a .sav file, which is a type of SPSS file. We want to change that to an Excel file. So you have to go down to Files of Type and switch that to Excel, and then you'll see your Excel data files appearing. I've got a few of them that we'll be using in our examples. Let me first open up the survey that I had all of you fill out at the start of the semester about your hair color and satisfaction with Chico State. And if you may remember that survey that you filled out on QuestionPro. So here's what the survey will look like. You double click on the file and it will open up. First of all, it'll be asking you if you want to use the variable names from the first row of data. If you've done it correctly, you should have the first row be your question numbers, and just say OK. And then SPSS will open up and you'll see this. Now, one thing to note, down in the bottom left of the screen, there's a tab called Data View and Variable View. It's important to know the difference between those two. The Data View is simply all of the data from your Excel spreadsheet that's been pulled into SPSS, and the Variable View is where we'll be putting in some information that will help us through our data analysis efforts. So you can look at Data View and notice, again, the subject number is listed here in the first column, and we have Q1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, all the way across all of our questions on the particular survey, and all the data is listed here. So things look like they worked out okay on our transfer from Excel to SPSS, so that looks great. The variable view is, as I said, where we'll be inputting some information that will be helpful for us as we go through data analysis. And one other thing to note with SPSS is getting familiar with the extensions of the data files that you're using. When we have data files, the extension is .sav file. So whereas a Word document is a .doc, in SPSS we refer to them as .sav files. We have also output files in SPSS, which shows the output of some of your data analysis. Those have an extension of .spo. So those are SPO files, and those are the output files. We'll get to that a little bit more later on as we do some of the analysis as well. So the first thing that you remember that we do once we pull data into SPSS is we have to clean up and organize a bit. And so I will show you what type of information you need to put here in this variable view file. The first thing that we need to do is take a look and get oriented. Notice now it's a little bit different. The orientation has shifted. Our first column here lists all of the question numbers, and each row corresponds to a question here in the variable view. So with question 1A, first of all, the name, we just leave that alone. That corresponds to the question. The type column, notice there's a lot of them are listed as numeric. There are a few listed as string. For SPSS, string is the reference to qualitative or words as a response, and you can have those in your Excel spreadsheet, but you just need to let SPSS know that those are string of responses. For this survey, we don't have any strings. Sometimes SPSS adjusts some things and guesses what the data is, but we need to let SPSS know these are actually all numeric variables on our survey. So what we do is you click in the cell, and notice when I click there, a little box with 3 dots appears. I click on that again, and it will give me a choice of what variable type that I'm using. I like to select numeric and say OK, and I need to do that for each of those. So I click once in the box to get the little blue box with 3 dots to appear, and then I click on the little blue box with 3 dots, and I select numeric and say OK. Now with each of these variables, now they're all listed as numeric. With decimals, we leave those alone, so ignore those columns, but the label column is where we put in a brief descriptive phrase for each question. If you look at the survey that you're using, and you have a question 1A, you need to decide what is a viable descriptive phrase that will help you understand what that question relates to and how you want to describe that. On our survey that we did in class, this was the question that relates to your general life happiness. So I may type in, as far as a subject number, something like life happiness. You want it to be pretty brief, pretty short, but give it a descriptive name so you'll understand what it is. For the next areas, values, this is where we put in codes for what those answers are on the data view field. Notice on Q1A we have all sorts of numbers here. You see lots of 3s, 4s, and 5s, and some 1s. We need to tell SPSS what each of those numbers relate to. So I click on the cell in values and click on the blue button again. And this is where I let SPSS know what the different codes might be that are related to my survey responses. So on my survey, I know that when people answered a 1, what that really meant was that they were very unsatisfied. So I type in 1, very unsatisfied, and then I click the button that says add. I could go through and add what 2, 3, 4, and 5 mean. So I say 2, and then hit tab means unsatisfied. You're basically taking the anchor endpoints on your scale and inputting them here so you know what they refer to. 3 relates to being neutral. And always click add after you type in the information. So I've typed in for SPSS that they know 1 means very unsatisfied all the way out to 5 being very satisfied, and I say OK. Now, one trick here that you want to be aware of, notice on the survey, if you recall, question 1A, B, C, D, and E all related to general satisfaction questions. 1A was your general life happiness, 1B was satisfaction with Chico State, 1C was satisfaction with the College of Business. All of them were using the same scale of very unsatisfied to very satisfied. Now, instead of typing all of this information every time, what I can do is I can put my cursor on this box where I've inserted the values. I can left click on that box and say copy, and then left click on the box below that and say paste. I can paste it in each of the boxes where I have the same exact scale, where it goes from very unsatisfied to very satisfied. I don't want to paste it here in question 2A because that's using a different scale on the survey that we did in class. That scale ranged from very unimportant to very important, and so I would need to put that new code in here for the values. And so I would click on the box, click on the little blue box with the 3 dots, and that's where this screen appears, and I input that information. So I would do that for every one of my questions that I had on my survey. I would need to let SPSS know what the codes are or the values for each of my responses. This is where the pre-coding comes in to our survey, and that's an important process. So once we get values inserted for all of our variables and labels to let us know what all the questions relate to, we want to continue on to do one last step. We leave missing and columns and mostly alignment. Leave all 3 of those just as they're stated. But the measure is one last item where we want to fix for SPSS and let them know what type of question it is. If I click on this cell, you'll see that I have 3 options. Each question can either be labeled as scale, ordinal, or nominal. You remember from our class discussions that scale questions refer to those Likert scale type questions, and where, for example, it's a scale of 1 to 7. So this life happiness scale really was a scale from 1 to 5, so it's a scale type question. I need to select scale. If it were an ordinal question, remember ordinal are those questions where you ask people to rank order items, you would just indicate for SPSS that it's ordinal. Or as you remember, nominal questions are those where we put people into categories. Yes, no, gender, have they done an activity or not, those would be nominal types of questions. But this one is scale, and notice each of these Q1A through Q1E are all scale questions, so I need to click on each of those cells and the drop down menu appears, and I just need to change each of those to scale items. Those are the steps I need to go through in order to put some information in. Doing this really helps in the data analysis phase because as I run different bits of data analysis, I prefer for the output to not be labeled Q1A. I prefer it to be labeled as life happiness, and that'll help me decipher what I'm seeing in front of me on an output table. In addition, I want to know that the values of the responses that I see are labeled as very unsatisfied to very satisfied. That helps me again decipher and understand what's happening in the data analysis. And then telling SPSS what type of question it is helps SPSS be alerted to what type of analysis I might be trying to run. So I would do this cleaning process by inputting data for every one of my questions all the way through question 18 on this particular survey. Once you get to this point, and you'll have a homework assignment that relates to doing this, you'll then be ready to get into some actual data analysis based on the data, and we'll leave that for the next video. So if you have any questions, please come see me, or of course you can watch this video again and look back to those PowerPoint slides for any of the details, because all of the steps here were also covered in that PowerPoint set of slides called Step 1 Data Analysis.